How many of you like to read picture books when you were growing up? How many of you think you can still learn from picture books? That is right. So we are going to be spending the day today talking about picture books and how we can learn about historical events from them. Okay? So we're going to start off by reading a book called Henry's Freedom Box. Okay? As we read, I do want you filling out a graphic organizer, so I'm passing that out now. If you would write your name at the top in the period, and the period is 5. So when we read Henry's Freedom Box, we are not going to just listen to the story. Yes, it's story time. We get to hear a nice story. We get to look at pictures. But we are also going to be analyzing, because that's part of what we do as scholars and historians, is we analyze how is this like what we've learned about history. Because we've already learned about the Civil War and the causes of the Civil War. So when we are analyzing, I've helped you out a little bit here. First thing we need to think about are the main characters. So who are the main characters? We haven't got this. The next thing we need to think about is, what is this book actually about? What is the plot? Why do you think the author wrote that book? Then we are going to think about, do we like this book? Do we not like this book? So you're going to rate it on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 being the worst book ever. You would never recommend it to anybody. You would not read it again ever. Okay? 0 is not an option. 5 is the best book, which means that you are going to read it over and over and over again. Or when you get older, you're going to read it to your kids. And then you're going to tell me why you gave it that rating. The 4th question you're going to think about is, what did you learn about the Civil War time period through this book? What was it telling us about this time period? How can we understand better this time period through this book? And then finally, the last question, which is number 5, is, does this book help you understand the Civil War time period better? You need to explain your answer. So you can't just tell me yes, you need to tell me how it helps you understand it better. Okay, so Henry's Freedom Box. Henry Brown wasn't sure how old he was. Henry was a slave, and slaves weren't allowed to know their birthdays. Henry and his brothers and sisters worked in the big house where the master lived. Henry's master had been good to Henry and his family, but Henry's mother knew things could change. Do you see those leaves blowing in the wind? They are torn from the trees like slave children are torn from their families. One morning, the master called for Henry and his mother. They climbed the wide staircase. The master lay in bed with only his head above the quilt. He was very ill. He beckoned them to come closer. Some slaves were freed by their owners. Henry's heart beat fast. Maybe the master would set him free. But the master said, "You are a good worker, Henry. I am giving you to my son. You must obey him and never tell a lie." Henry nodded, but he didn't say thank you. That would have been a lie. So what did Henry want? Freedom. Henry worked in his new master's factory. He was good at his job. "Do not tear that tobacco leaf," the boss yelled at the new boy. He poked the boy with a stick. If you made a mistake, the boss would beat you. Henry was lonely. One day he met Nancy, who was shopping for her mistress. They walked and talked and agreed to meet again. Henry felt like singing, but slaves didn't dare sing in the streets. Instead, he hummed all the way home. Why don't you think slaves were allowed to sing in the streets?
Say it again?
Why don't you think slaves were allowed to sing in the streets?
Or couldn't sing?
Yeah, they could not voice their opinion. Very good, Zachary. Because were they considered as people or what? Property. Very good. Months later, Henry asked Nancy to be his wife. When both their masters agreed, Henry and Nancy were married. Soon there was a little baby, then another and another. Henry knew they were very lucky. They lived together even though they had different masters. But Nancy was worried. Her master had lost a great deal of money. "I'm afraid he will sell our children," she said. Henry sat very still. Was this a reality for most slaves?
Yes.
Henry worked hard all morning. He tried to forget what Nancy had said. Was it something easily to forget, though?
No.
His friend James came into the factory. He whispered to Henry, "Your wife and children were just sold at the slave market." "No," cried Henry. Henry couldn't move. He couldn't think. He couldn't work. "Twist that tobacco." The boss poked Henry. Henry twisted tobacco leaves. His heart twisted in his chest. So put yourself in Henry's shoes. How would you feel if you were Henry and your whole family had just been sold? At lunchtime, Henry rushed to the center of town. The large group of slaves was tied together. The owner shouted at them. Henry looked for his family. "Father! Father!" Henry watched his children disappear down the road. Where was Nancy? He saw her at the same moment she saw him. When he wiped away his tears, Nancy too was gone. Henry no longer sang. He couldn't hum. He went to work, and at night he ate supper and went to bed. Henry tried to think of happy times, but all he could see were the carts carrying away everyone he loved. Henry knew he would never see his family again. Could this lead to a very bad depression for slaves?
Yeah.
Many weeks passed. One morning, Henry heard singing. A little bird flew out of the tree into the open sky, and Henry thought about being free. But how? As he lifted a crate, he knew the answer. He asked James and Dr. Smith to help him. Dr. Smith was a white man who thought slavery was wrong. What is that group of people called?
Abolitionists.
Abolitionists, very good. They met early the next day at an empty warehouse. Henry arrived with a box. "I will mail myself to a place where there are no slaves," he said. James stared at the box, then at Henry. "What if you cough and someone hears you?" "I will cover my mouth and hope," Henry said. So is it a guarantee he's going to get to be free?
No.
But are slaves willing to take that chance?
Yes.
Yeah. Dr. Smith wrote on the box, "To William H. Johnston, Arch Street, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Henry would be delivered to friends in Philadelphia." Then he printed on the crate in big letters, "This side up, with care." Why do you think they wrote that? So he could breathe, and people would think that what was in the box?
Something else.
Something delicate, glass, dishes, something like that. Henry needed an excuse to stay home, or the work boss would think he had run off. James pointed to Henry's sore finger, but Henry knew it wasn't bad enough. He opened a bottle of oil of vitriol. "No!" cried James. Henry poured it on his hand. It burned his skin to the bone. Now the boss would have to let him stay home. Dr. Smith bandaged Henry's hand. They arranged to meet the next morning at 4 o'clock. Now this is 4 o'clock in the morning. Why 4 o'clock in the morning?
Because he got to go to work.
So he wouldn't have to go to work? Hours passed. Henry was lifted up and thrown again. Upside down. He heard waves splashing. This must be the steamboat headed for Washington, D.C. The ship rode smoothly, but Henry was still upside down. Blood rushed to his head. His face got hot. His eyes ached. He thought his head would burst. But he was afraid to move. Someone might hear him. What would happen if someone heard him? They could catch him, and then what would happen to Henry? Put him back into slavery. Yes,
What
ma'am.
is he doing?
He's trying to escape to freedom.
What, is he in a box?
Remember, he's in a crate. Yep.
Nobody knows?
They think he's just male.
So he can't breathe?
With these crates, if you look back at this picture, with these crates you can see that there's like little air here. It's not like a cardboard box like we would think about today. Does that make sense? "I'm tired of standing," someone said. "Why move that box and sit on it?" said another. Henry held his breath. Could they be talking about his box? Henry was pushed. The box scraped the deck. Now he was on his right side. Now on his left. And suddenly, right side up. "What do you think is in here?" said one man. "Mail, I guess," said the other. "I am mail," Henry thought, but not the kind they imagined. Henry was carried off the steamboat and placed in a railroad car, this time head up. He fell asleep to the rattling song of the train wheels. He awoke to loud knocking. "Henry, are you all right in there?" "All right," he answered. The cover was pried open. Henry stretched and stood up. 4 men smiled at him. Welcome to Philadelphia. At last, Henry had a birthday. March 30th, 1849. His first day of freedom, and from that day on, he also had a middle name. Everyone called him Henry Fox Brown. Now this is a true story of a way on the Underground Railroad, because when I say Underground Railroad, was it actually a train?
No.
No. Was it actually underground?
No.
Who are the main characters of this book? Austin, give me one.
Henry.
Henry is one. Okay. Parker, who's another one? He's not a main character. He's another character, not main. Yes, Dr. Smith. So you're going to pretend that you are making your own children's book about the Civil War. Because there are hundreds and hundreds out there. If you were to go on Amazon and look for children's books on the Civil War, you'll have search pages, tons and tons and tons of them. So you're going to pretend that you're going to write your own. So it can be anything. It can be about the Underground Railroad, much like Henry's Freedom Box was. It can be about the actual war, what we saw yesterday, and America's Story of Us. It could be about a specific person, so you can choose to do a nonfiction book and do it on a specific person. Anything about the Civil War that we've learned already is what you can put in your book cover. You're not writing the actual book, so you're just doing the book cover. So if we take a look at Henry's Freedom Box, we see that it has a title on the front page, and then it's got the author's and illustrator's name, okay? And it's got its picture. Then on the back, it gives a little bit of a summary. So what you guys are going to be doing is you're going to be doing a title cover, and then you're going to be writing a summary on the back. Yeah, you'll draw a picture. So, of course, I did an example for you. Okay? So we have Courageous Cleo. No mocking the artwork. Okay? Because we all know Miss Rainey can't draw. So we have Courageous Cleo, and we have a picture of Cleo. It can be something that simple. And then we have By Mrs. Rainey, obviously because I'm the author. If you were to open up my book, you see nothing is there because you're not actually writing the story today. Okay? Then we turn it to the back. That's where your summary is going to be. So the summary that I wrote was, Cleo was a young slave. She worked hard for her master. Even though her family was sold, she continued to work hard. In this book, we see how Cleo keeps her courage through slavery and the Civil War. Once the war is over, Cleo is finally free and has to find new courage to learn how to live her new life as a freed woman. So you can see that I have decided to talk about slavery and how this Cleo escaped slavery and how she is courageous and brave in doing that. Now, should I see the word courageous anywhere on your book cover? No, because that's the one that I use. You can use a synonym or a word that means the same thing. So things like brave, those kinds of words to describe. That's fine. The easiest way to do this is to come up with what is your story going to be about. Go ahead and write your summary, and then come back and do the title and illustration to the front page. So I would start on the back before doing the front. Do you have the remainder of the class period to work on this? I'll find Mr. Hebert's colored pencils and stuff, but I would start out with doing it in pencil. Okay, you will fold it in half like a hamburger. So you get your paper, fold it in half like that, let the corners meet up. The mini ball, and I'll write that up there. Okay, so this would be your book. Okay, I want you to go ahead and get started.
Can I sit with them? Thank you.